So welcome everybody to Veterans Discourse. My name is Bruno Moya. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran. I served in Iraq in 2003, and I found out about psychedelics I'm assuming like a lot of people through the Joe Rogan podcast. A couple of friends that were pretty squared away introduced me to the actual process of everything, and it has completely changed my life. And I'm a social worker by trade, so I clung on to this modality because I saw the potential of the healing process and how it connects people and how it kind of opens your mind to other possibilities and stuff. So here we are now. I'm a huge advocate. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I work for Emerging Vets and Players, and I'm one of the co-hosts for the Veterans Discourse here. And my brother Armand is our other co-host for this podcast or for this discourse, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name is Armand Lecomte, Marine Corps veteran from 2-7, veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, just here to co-host with everyone here. I'm ambassador for Heroic Hearts Project and Veterans of War.
So today we have a special guest who works with Heroic Hearts Project. His name is Jared Rinehart. I met him a few months ago. We started talking about ways that we can collaborate with Emerging Vets and Players, the organization that I work with, which we work with combat veterans and professional athletes. You know, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done in the veteran community, as many of us know, and also in the sports community with traumatic brain injuries and so forth. So a couple of us at MVP decided to reach out to Heroic Hearts after they got introduced to us, and we just think that they're a great organization, and we're excited to have Jared on to talk about what they do and what he does specifically, and to share his story and everything. So with that, I will turn it over to Jared so he can talk a little bit about who he is. He's a Marine Corps Infantryman from 2-7, I believe, right, Jared?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, awesome. Small world, because one of our guys was in 2-7, and you guys know each other. So there's a lot of 2-7 guys at MVP. So that's kind of cool to see that. Jared, welcome, and please go ahead and introduce yourself, man.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for showing up. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jared Rinehart. I am a Marine Corps veteran. 5 years, I was in Echo 2-7 as a machine gunner. After the Marine Corps, I was in the Marine Corps in 2006 to 2011. 2012, when I was still kind of integrating out, I was going through a divorce. And as most of us as vets can understand, transitioning out of the military was probably the hardest transition of my life. I was struggling with drinking issues, drugs, anger, lots of stuff. Couldn't hold a job. Lots of anger that I had towards the world. And the only place that I felt normal was overseas or with a gun in my hand in a team environment. So I desperately was looking for contracts when I got out of the Marine Corps. I eventually got on one, and my first contract was in Afghanistan, and I was out there for 11 months and the south end. So I was in close to Nalzad and in Camp Lebanon. So that was my first contract, and I came back and then integrated home from Afghanistan for a few months. In that time frame, I didn't have a job. I had a bunch of money from being a contractor. So I just sat around and smoked a lot of weed and drank a lot of beer. The mental issues that I was going through were only getting worse. I was secluding myself from others. I wasn't really communicating with other people. So the only other option I could probably do at that point was find another contract. So I went to another contract in Iraq for this time. And this time I spent about 3.5 years in Iraq, and then about 30 days of each of those years I'd spend on vacation or at home. At one point, one of those 30-day vacations or those leave breaks that I took, I decided to go drink ayahuasca. I had been introduced to psychedelics in kind of the party scene. My girlfriend at the time was really into psychedelics, so she would have me try certain things, but I never really used them with the intention of healing, more for just kind of escapism, which they helped in some points. But when things got tough, I didn't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. I just kind of compartmentalized it as I was really messed up that night and didn't need to think about it. So then I heard about DMT from Joe Rogan on that Spirit Molecule documentary they had on Netflix, I was like, well, there seems to be something more to this than I may be getting. So I went back to Iraq and I really studied about DMT and everything else. And then I came home and tried DMT before I went to go drink ayahuasca. And when I tried it, I had a very life-altering experience that it's hard to describe, but the best way to describe it was I was in some sort of other world that was made of like love and understanding, and I had been there before, and there was this like very loving entity that was the environment that I was in, so to speak, and it told me to go to the jungle. After that experience, I looked into ayahuasca, and then my next leave break from Iraq, I went to the jungle. And so I went to this place in Pucallpa named Nimacaya, and they have 9-day retreats there, and I did 4 ayahuasca ceremonies. At that time, I was going right from Iraq to Peru, and I had no idea the impact that this experience was going to have on my life. It completely flipped the script 180 degrees on my life completely. And how that happened was I still don't know to this day. Like, something happened in those ceremonies that shifted the internal dialogue for myself. Nothing on the external world changed. Like, I still had the same job, the same people, the same environments I was going into, but how I thought about myself, how I spoke to myself inside of my own head, how I treated myself emotionally had completely changed after 4 ceremonies and 9 days. And I felt so clear-headed and so centered, and there was no more anger, there was no more depression, there was no real like aggression left to project on the world. I was just filled with a lot of love, to be honest. And then I didn't know what else to do after that, because I didn't know if I wanted to be a contractor anymore, if I wanted to do this, but the only thing I could think about doing was just continuing on. So a week after that retreat, I went back to Iraq for about 9 months, and I was on that contract for 9 months. And in that 9 months, I really dedicated myself into meditation, introspective work, and really philosophy and study. Also along the lines, I dedicated myself to changing the way I treated the people around me with ones of love, acceptance, and just trust. And with that intention, moving into a war zone, I changed the environment of where I was. We were still in a war zone, but the people that I interacted with were now not just my coworkers or team members, they were my best friends. The Iraqis that I was working with were not just Iraqis that were dumb and didn't know how to do what they were doing. They were people, or they were kids. And they were people I was trying to help, and not just a burden of my day. People making mistakes, again, didn't bother me. I was more capable of helping people. I had so much more compassion for the situations around me and less cynicism. After 9 months of integrating in Iraq, I decided I don't want to be a contractor anymore. I just didn't want to be in a job that wanted to put me in harm's way, or for me to have the opportunity to hurt another person. I didn't want to have a job that put me there. Not that I'm against any of these jobs, not that I don't see a reason for these jobs. I just didn't want myself to be in that anymore. I felt like I had done my time. It was over. Time for me to hang up the rifle, so to speak. Again, not knowing where to go, I called the facility that I went to and asked if I could facilitate, and they welcomed me with open arms. So I went down there, went and lived in the jungle for about 10 months to work with the Shipibo tribe and live at the center and help other people go through the ceremonies of ayahuasca, and then help them kind of through their process of healing. And also in that time, I worked with all different types of plant medicines, different types of psychedelics, and learned all different types of healing modalities that are really structured in the Peru, Amazon area, especially in Pucallpa. On my last excursion in the jungle, I had one last retreat I was invited to, and that was for a documentary about veterans in ayahuasca curing PTSD. And that is where I met Jesse Gould, and also the love of my life. So I met my soulmate and my best friend / business partner at one retreat, and the rest is kind of history. He asked me about a year after that retreat if I wanted to help coach for this organization he was starting, and I was all about it. So now I work for this organization called Heroic Hearts, and what we do is we connect veterans to different types of psychedelic healing. At this time, primarily ayahuasca, but the symptoms of TBI, we're working with psilocybin for a study that's coming up. What I do as an integration coach is I prepare the veterans before they go to the retreat, and then help them integrate their experiences after they get home from the retreat. And when I prepare them, what I do is I work with them about a month to 2 months out, and we get them ready, and we talk about getting their intentions, making sure that their mind is clear and everything else, and getting them some practices to help them stabilize themselves and get centered for the experience, and start giving them some introspective tools for their experience and something they could take into their own life. And what I've found through coaching is with these introspective tools, even before they go do ayahuasca, is it really starts to help them reflect on what they want to work on and help with their intention. And then when they drink ayahuasca and come home, these tools are now used as a foothold for their mental health. So they now are in that introspective mindset when they come home. And we then help them integrate for about 2 months after they get back, and then continually on afterwards if they require it. That's, I guess, me in a nutshell.
Thank you, man. When I came home, I was married. And the first time I did any psychedelics in a very sacred way like yourself, I was married at that time for about 12 years. And I had told my wife that I loved her like 3 times in those 12 years. You know, that was significant. And I felt really bad about, well, I didn't feel bad about it at the time, but now talking about it, I feel like I lost a lot of opportunities. And one of the times I was under anesthesia because I had a procedure done. So I was, you know, essentially I was high, you know what I mean? And I told my wife that I loved her. So she kind of doesn't count it. I do, but you know, but the first time that I did a psychedelic in a healing modality, and the psychedelic was a kana, which is a South African plant, very similar to MDMA. Since that time, it changed my relationship with my wife 180. I mean, I tell her I love her every single day, and I mean it. Sometimes I get like a little teary-eyed talking about that, just because it was so impactful, that this one experience that I had. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and some of the work that you do, especially with integration pre and post, and what you're seeing with connections, because I think that's a big thing, especially with what the world is going through, what we're going through as a nation. You know, like we're divided. We have these different things. Take the vaccine, don't take the vaccine, wear a mask, like all these different things that makes us so different, which different is good, but then it makes us divided. You know, and I was wondering if you can just talk a little bit about your experience of seeing people's change through that human connection.
I find that most of these psychedelics, if not all, are extremely heart-opening medicines, especially in the veteran community. What I find is we have been trained to literally put armor over our heart, like emotional armor. And then any emotion that we have been taught to throw it into the fire of anger and aggression, and then use that fire and that anger as a tool. It's phenomenal to do that for combat. Great to get people ready for combat. That's a phenomenal tool to use. It's not very good for coming back and being with your family. When I took ayahuasca, what it felt like to me is all of that conditioning of protecting myself and looking at people as a threat to myself was stripped away, and I started to see people as people, and meaning like as myself, started to see them more like, man, if I'm suffering or if I'm going through something like this, I can't imagine what someone else may be going through. It may be way worse than what I'm going through. And I've heard these phrases and stuff most of my life, but for some reason after ayahuasca, it clicked. It just clicked. Like I was like, man, I'm not treating people well. I mean, I used to brag to people about how I wasn't treating people well. And now I don't want to. It doesn't feel right at all just to treat people poorly, because I feel like that ayahuasca experience humbled me very, very much. It humbled my sense of better than other that I had. And I love the Marine Corps, but the Marine Corps really is good at making Marines feel like they're the best fucking thing on the planet. And that conditioning is very, very hard to get quiet. I'm not saying for it to go away. That confidence is a wonderful tool, but to quiet it down so you're not the most confident and the most important and the most smartest person in the room is very hard. And ayahuasca for me helped me rip that off of the armor off my heart. And now working with veterans at the same time, I see the same results. Before they go, they're very closed off. They don't want to speak about their emotional issues. They don't want to talk about the gushy stuff with their wife or their kids, you know, this human stuff, especially with males in a male culture. And it's starting to shift slowly, but that is not a topic that's usually brought up in groups of men. You know, it's not small talk for men to talk about hugging their kids and watching a sappy movie with their wife. And I feel like that might be changing, but still, this destigmatizes all of that stuff as far as the masculine, feminine, all this. It just rips it all apart and allows them to connect back in with their heart, and they can feel other people again.
Jared, you're right. We get taught to just really put a lot of armor around our heart. One of the topic discussions for MVP actually last week was talking about the improper conditioning of connecting with other people while we were in the service, and it worked, right? Because we moved around from unit to unit every year, every 2 years. You know what I mean? We deployed, and some of those people didn't come back, so we didn't want to make those connections with people, because once we got too close, we're brothers, we love each other, but we get too close and then we have to leave, you know? So again, it's that body armor around the heart. Armand, have you seen the change? Can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm really related so much to what Jared said. Yeah, I guess I'll start off with, super small world. I got linked up with the Heroic Hearts Project through the campaign manager of Measure 109, which legalized psilocybin therapy in Oregon. And I was already linked up to do a retreat with them. Then I was reading their website and saw Jared's profile, say it was the integration coach for the organization. So I reached out through email, didn't get a response. So then I emailed Jesse, head of Jesse, and told him I was trying to get in touch with Jared to talk about his training. So because I was looking to go down the same path. And we talked, and he shared, and it was great. And already at that point, Jesse was happy to support me on my path. And then after doing an ayahuasca retreat with Heroic Hearts Project, all veterans, I hit one Marine for my unit and said, I just did this. I thought he'd find it very fascinating. And he came from Marine Special Operations Battalion. And I told him, he's like, yeah, I actually know one person who's done that and, gone down that path and made a better life for himself. He's like, oh yeah, his name is Jared Rinehart. I'm like almost positive that's the guy I talked to like a couple weeks ago. And I had to like double check myself. And yeah, it turns out we're in the same unit, same company, Echo Company. I served with Echo Company for Iraq and Afghanistan. And we must have just been in the same unit at the same time, just passing each other, or maybe barely missed each other. Crazy small world. That I take that as a sign. But then to answer your question, for me, now that I've had time out of the Marine Corps and doing my own healing process, it's become so clear, like in male culture in general, and then especially Marine Corps culture, like only certain feelings are sanctioned, so to say. And like anger, you can be angry, you can be mad, you can be pissed, but anything anywhere close to vulnerability is like probably the biggest taboo in Marine Corps culture. Weakness is the most taboo thing, and showing weakness is considered weakness in Marine Corps culture. So then once for me, my healing process, like expanding my range of emotions that I'm able to recognize within myself has been so helpful. And I see that so much with other people. So helping them through that process of expanding their awareness of what emotions they're able to recognize within themselves. Because in my experience, what happens is when you're not able to recognize a feeling like hurt, like you feel hurt or you feel sad about something, what happens is you then project on other people, like, oh, that person's just an asshole. That person wronged me, or that person's a shitbag, or like you're not able to actually recognize what's going on with you. It has to be out because you've been trained out of recognizing certain feelings.
It's interesting watching that, and Jared, I do want to ask you about something else that you mentioned that I see a lot. So whenever I do anything. Whenever I do any of the ceremonies and stuff like that, especially when I facilitate, one of the questions that often pops up for some of the guys that I work with is the self-love. Like, can you look at yourself in the mirror and appreciate what you're seeing? Do you love yourself? Like all that stuff. And it's so weird to talk about, as Marines, but to the core of it, it's part of that transformation, understanding who you are and all of that stuff. wondering if you could talk a little bit about that topic of learning how to love yourself after a non-ordinary state of consciousness. I mean, going through an experience like ayahuasca or psilocybin or any of the other powerful medicines out there, like, you have those bad trips, and those bad trips kind of put those challenges with your ego and all of these things, and like people have to navigate that. And that's part of like facilitating, is helping people facilitate through that challenging experience, you know what I mean? But once you're able to break through that and start really going inward and accepting a lot of the things, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, all of that stuff, there's a huge transformation. But I think for me personally, like the way that I see it is that self-love, learning how to really love yourself despite past actions, all of that stuff, and accepting yourself, you know what I mean? Thinking that you are worth it 100%. Do you have any like experiences with that? I know you talked a little bit about that with your intro, man. And I think that's just such a key portion with this work, is that self-love, of appreciation of who you are, and staring at yourself in the mirror and being like, dude, I know you talked about like Marines think that we're the baddest and everything, but sometimes you got to think that like, hey man, I'm fucking so worth it despite my past,
When you hit it actually real good. It was going from thinking I'm the baddest to thinking I'm the greatest, and not in an egoic way, like I'm the greatest at this, saying like I'm the greatest in my reality, like this is it, like all I have is Jared and his reality. Self-love is, especially if you haven't had like examples to see in your life of like real self-love, it's hard to see that. And a lot of us, especially in America, our idea of what self-love is having a candy bar, going out to the spa, getting pampered, buying something we really like, these temporary fixes, these temporary gratifications of like relaxation or pleasure. And yeah, some of those, like those can be considered like you're giving yourself attention and love. That's understandable. But what I'm talking about with self-love is being able to look at yourself in the mirror, acknowledging the parts of yourself that you're not okay with, and accepting it and being okay with it after that, being like, yep, man, I don't look as like I used to 20 years ago. Man, I am not the person I thought I was anymore. I love myself for that, because if it wasn't for me being the way I am now, then I wouldn't have all the wonderful gifts I have in my life. So one of the tools that I used actually when I got back from my first ayahuasca experience, and this felt really weird, but I tried it out. One of the facilitators told me about it, is I looked in the mirror every day for 30 days. And I looked myself in the eyes and I said, I love you. I said it until it stopped feeling weird. Every day it felt weird for a long time, until eventually it just started to feel normal. And that really helped me connect with myself. It really helped me to build that self-love. And then the next thing that I would try to do is work on those introspective things, not necessarily what's going on externally, but how are you responding internally? How am I responding to myself internally when I make a mistake? Am I saying, you fucking idiot, you shouldn't have done that? Or am I saying like, hey, dude, it's good. It's all right. You got this. Nice try. And it's both sometimes. Sometimes it's a real nice pat on the back, and sometimes it's, you idiot, come on. But what I try to do is I try to recognize when that negative self-talk comes up and just note it, going, up, I did it again. Oh, I did it again. I talked to myself negatively. And every time that I do that, it loosens, and it's less and less and less negative self-talk. And I don't think anybody can ever get rid of the self-talk. I don't think that's the point. I think it's just learning to like not pay attention to it.
I don't know, Jared. I think that can be healed, honestly. But
yeah, for sure. But that's one of the significant things that I've noticed with myself. I grew up with a dad that was extremely he was hard, and I appreciated that, but he would always degrade people, you know what I mean? And so that's how I grew up, thinking to myself like, man, you fucking idiot, pendejo, all of these things, like I would always bash on myself whenever I made a mistake or whenever I did something that was good, but I didn't think it was good enough, And that was one of the significant changes that I seen, is identifying that and thinking to myself, nah, man, it's all good, man. Like it's all good, We'll get through this, well, whatever. My wife has noticed the difference too. She says that there's a pre-Bruno and a post-Bruno from the psych, and she loves who I am now, and but it's hard work too. So
yeah, and I think this actually goes back to what you were saying with the bad trips, as people call them.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times when people may feel like they're suffering in psychedelic experiences, a lot of times in life, the reason why we're suffering is because we are not accepting what is happening, how things are, and we resist what is actually going on. And we don't want to believe it, and we get angry and we avoid, and things get really tight. That's a bad trip. When you're like, I don't like the way the government is, and then you can't do anything about it, and you start spinning yourself up over it, and you lose your mind over it, that's a bad trip. That's a really bad trip. But if you learn to just see everything as it is, yes, this is going on. Yep, there's a fire happening. Yes, there's a virus happening. Yes, I'm in this psychedelic state and I'm not feeling very good. It has taught me, at least, that if I learn to sit and allow it to take its process, it will pass and then transform into something else. Maybe that something else will be something I like. Maybe it won't. But the universe doesn't seem to really care what Jared likes or doesn't like. I find it very valuable to learn to sit in these uncomfortable situations, because that allows me to sit in the uncomfortable situation of life. Because I don't care who you are, at least for me, life is uncomfortable. Like there's lots of aspects of life that are super uncomfortable. And if I can learn to just sit and be comfortable in the discomfort, I think that tool is that breaks the bank on so many things you can do in your life.
Hell yeah, man. And I think you made a great distinction between having a challenging trip or a challenging experience versus a bad trip. Because the way that I explain it with this is that bad trips are when you're off balance, and typically when you're doing a psychedelic therapy in a very serious manner, you don't have bad trips, you have challenging experiences. And I think that's something that people are really scared of. But when you explain to people some of the processes, I mean, essentially they're kind of the same thing, really, at the core, but it's kind of like saying I'm broke versus I'm poor. You know what I mean? It's the idea of how you view it and how you go into it, and then also kind of helping people through those challenging experiences and helping them find meaning in it, and typically they do it themselves, really. It's helpful when somebody's there to kind of guide you through that experience. I know we have a hand up, Mr. Gray. Jared, you mind if we answer some questions here from people?
Please, let's do it.
Cool.
Wasn't a question per se. I just wanted to piggyback for a second off of hi again, Jared. Hi, Bruno. I just wanted to say, in my own work with veterans of war, one of the things that question comes up a lot in the veteran community, even in the psychedelic community. How do you avoid a bad trip? And what I've always said to my participants is, you don't avoid a bad trip. You lean into it. You expect that it's going to be challenging, and you understand that we're going to be here to give you the tools to navigate that. But the challenge is something that you can learn from. And I don't know, there's this weird idea that, everything's supposed to be comfortable and fun. And ayahuasca is neither comfortable nor fun for most people. So yeah, I saw the Terrence McKenna quote, and I love Terrence McKenna. He's like, if there's such a thing, he's my spirit animal. And I love him. I've voraciously eaten and digested all the things that he's put out there, if there's such a way to do so. I also see psychedelic experience as an opportunity to sort of face some of these darker aspects of ourselves. And there's this really awesome part, if you've seen, what is it? Well, either way, there's this idea of facing your shadow self, and you can absolutely be a battle, right? To battle your shadow self. But I think that the goal should be to integrate with that, to find the parts of those pieces that you don't maybe agree with, or that you don't like how it feels in your mouth. And as Jared said earlier, rather than to negate them, instead to say, I see you, I recognize that you're a part of me, and I choose to not allow you to have the wheel anymore, but I recognize that that's what you're going to try to do.
Yeah.
So good. Well put, man. Well put.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think we can have an hour and a half discussion minimum with just that. Just that topic, it's the leaning into those challenging experiences is just incredibly important with his work, and maybe we should dedicate some time to that.
Well, I think that just a small part of that, the veteran community alone, all the vets that I have coached, if you give them that like, know that it's not going to be an easy thing, it's not going to be vacation, that it's going to be hard work, and that they need to lean into it, they all seem to be okay with leaning into it. And I think that just comes from the veteran mindset of going like, okay, we gotta climb this hill, I'll climb the hill, like what do I gotta do? And
embrace the suck, baby.
Into it. Yep, embrace the suck. And I think that also can be looked at as warrior spirit, like just embracing that suffering, embracing the hardship that's coming, and using your warrior spirit to move through it, or actually have it move through you.
To sit with it, like you said earlier, to like let it pass through you, to acknowledge that it's there, that it's an important part of your process, but to simply not let it be in control. I think that's the distinction for me, at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is powerful right there. Understanding who's in charge of the wheel. And it can be difficult, because these ideas, these thoughts, the self-talk, it just comes in, and people believe that it's a part of who they are. And in a sense it is, but essentially you're not the first thought that comes into your mind. That's not who you are unless you choose to do that, So that we can talk about that all day, and that's extremely important with this work. But Jared, man, I want to hear a little bit more about your time in the Amazon, living with a Shipibo tribe. I want to learn about your experiences down there and what you learned and just how it was.
That experience, I think, stretched the very bonds of what I thought reality was, to be honest. I experienced direct experiences of mysticism and unfolding in front of me, with shamanic practices and miracle healing in front of me. Living with the Shipibo was a really interesting aspect. What many of you may have in your mind is like some off village in the middle of the jungle with like straw huts. No, like this is a bigger village or city called Pucallpa, and there was a jungle center that I lived in that was about 5-10 minutes inside of the jungle itself. So when I was living out there, we were living in what you would see most ayahuasca centers, just like tombos or huts that were like straw huts, and we lived in the jungle and lived off the jungle. So all the food that we had there was taken from the locals that they picked from out there. And it was just completely different for me, leaving the Iraq world with contractors and tough guy mentality to going to an ayahuasca center, which was primarily filled with Westerners who were, on their own little spiritual path. So in essence, I was going from being a contractor to a hippie. And that alone was so challenging for my sense of self that it broke down a lot of those walls too, about like me seeing people differently than myself and putting people in different labels. Some of the practices that I got to work with down there included combo medicine, rape. I did a tobacco diet when I was down there, but most of it, man, was a lot of helping people, because we did ceremonies every 2 weeks for groups that came through. And then on the 2 weeks that we had off as facilitators, that's when we drank ayahuasca and worked with the plants and worked with the shamans and did that stuff. So it was like 2 weeks with the guests there, and then 2 weeks of off time where we would do our own personal work.
Can you explain a little bit about the diets that you tell? Like you mentioned the tobacco diet, and Arman, I don't know if you have any experience with the dietas that they call. Can you explain a little bit about that?
So a diet or a dieta is what they do in shamanic practice to start to, how to put this in Western terms, to really get into a communication with that plant, to feel into it. How shamans have told me is that basically this is how they become allies with these plants, And this is how they can use these plants as allies in ceremony to help with healing. So when I dieted tobacco, I drank pretty much a glass of tobacco juice. In traditional sense, what you would do at that point is then you would go into a tombo or a isolation area, and you would be isolated for a few weeks at a time. And in that time frame, the only person you will see is the shaman, and they'll be giving you very little food. You'll be fasting for most of this period of time and just consuming this plant at small portions. And you have this very introspective isolation period. And then in that process, you'll be working with ayahuasca as well. The fascinating thing is when you work with ayahuasca and do diets, a lot of times you can actually form a communication with these plants. And I mean like more of a telepathic communication. And you can communicate on a level that most Westerners, if I were to talk about, would make their skin crawl because it just doesn't make sense. It's this is what I experienced down there. So with tobacco, during my my experience with ayahuasca and tobacco, I had visions of tobacco playing instruments around me and communicating with me and giving me knowledge through light and sound. If you go deeper with these diets, a lot of times the shamans or the curanderos or the healers, depending on what you like to call them, this is how they get their sacred healing songs. And this is something that us in the West don't like to really talk about. It's kind of danced around. But one of the reasons why organizations like Veterans of War and Heroic Hearts have such great track records when it comes to healing is because we have found centers who have amazing healers. And these healers have been working in these traditions through a millennia, through generations, and they're doing something that we as Westerners don't really understand within the realms of mysticism, that is curing people of their mental health issues and also physical issues. So these diets are what these curanderos will do for years in isolation in the jungle, studying from the plants themselves, not the way we would study in a college, but direct communication with these plants in the jungle.
I've always been very open to the idea that plants are conscious, not human conscious, but they're just plant conscious, and I was raised with if we have like an orange tree in the backyard, before you pick the orange, you ask the tree permission, so this wasn't very foreign to me. But as a Westerner, I've lived in the United States since I was 6 years old. So understanding this idea of the shamanic relationship with nature, it was foreign a little bit to me, you know what I mean? And when you explain to people like these diets and the meaning behind like ingesting this tea with a certain type of plant and forming this relationship with them, is sometimes it can be a little difficult to explain to people. But I dieted Bobinsana, the Amazonian plant, and it was life changing. It was great. And I've heard from people that tobacco, mapacho, I think they call it, right? That it's one of the harder plants to diet, but it's one of the most profound ones too. Armand, what's up, man? Go ahead and chime in here.
I want to ask Jared, from his experience working with so many people going into the entheogenic space for the first time, like within the veteran healing space, I feel like a lot of people, it's going to be their first psychedelic entheogenic experience, period. It's like classically hard to describe, impossible to convey like what this experience is. And then even more so, like, you're saying this framework of the healing that's going on with shamans and in this realm just doesn't match up with our paradigm of healing from our Western perspective.
Yep.
And then Wiley asked, like, what are your tools for introspection to give to people to prep? So what tools, tips, perspectives do you try to convey to people going into their first entheogenic experience for the first time?
So for ayahuasca specifically, since it can be a very intense plant medicine, I don't lie to them, but I also don't give them all of my knowledge and experience behind it, because I don't want to scare them, because it can be a lot of information, and a lot of information can bring up anxiety. So what I will do is I will gauge the individual on what they already know. Some of them know a lot about ayahuasca. Some of them are still diving deep into trip reports. And that's one of the first things I tell anybody, if anybody's watching this or listening and they're about to have their first psychedelic experience, stop watching trip reports. Stop it. It's not going to do you any good, because all it's going to do is produce expectations for what you think it's going to be like. And everyone has different experiences on all different types of substances because it's so personal and it's so geared towards that person taking it. So for introspection skills or tools that I would give is really just some of the basics: journaling every day, meditation at least 5 to 10 minutes a day starting, and then hopefully leading up to 20 minutes before you go. And then we'll work on the intention setting alone is a huge tool, because you ask someone, why are you going to drink ayahuasca for healing? Or why are you using psychedelics for healing? And that makes them have to ask themselves, well, am I doing this for an experience, or am I doing it for healing? Am I doing it for this? And that already initiates an introspective practice. So then when you start looking at what their intentions may be, then you can help, you ask questions like, why do you want that? Why is that your intention? And then they naturally start taking that from the sessions, and I give them journal prompts for their intentions. And then they can start being more introspective about like, yeah, I want more love in my life. And what does that look like? Things like that. And then it just starts to really evolve. And like I said, with the help of psychedelics, they seem to have a really good, like 30-day to 60-day window after they drink ayahuasca to utilize these tools almost to their maximum potential and use them as future habits in their life, which seem to be working. I did see right here that Sasha asked a question and said, Jared, you mentioned that HHP is working with psilocybin to treat symptoms related to traumatic brain injury. Dr. Matthew Johnson and John Hopkins is working with UFC studying psilocybin and TBI as a present moment. Are you working with any specific centers or clinical research studying psilocybin, or are these mushroom workshop centers outside the US? So we are about to have a joint, I guess we can call it operation, if you will, but it's really Robin Carr Harris. And I think he'll be leading a study on an observational study on the psilocybin and traumatic brain injury. This will include things like brain scans and blood tests and observational studies of before and after and all that. So we have that is what we have coming up actually rather soon. And it'll be the first time we've ever gotten to work with this. So I'm really looking forward to it.
And that's a big deal, because Robert Carhart Harris, he's one of the first guys that I learned about when I was doing a lot of the research, and he does a lot of research. I think he's from the Imperial College of London. He's done some ayahuasca studies, and he's at the forefront of the research of psychedelics and how they impact our brain. So I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully we can get some of our members to be a part of that, because there's a lot of head trauma that we are experiencing, and some of the symptoms look alike as well, from PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, so, and a lot of our fighters too, their job is to get punched in the face, or not to get punched in the face, but you can't avoid it. So yeah, that's something that we're really interested in. Leo, my brother, go ahead, man.
Good morning, all. Real quick, other than the mental healing that ayahuasca does it do anything else as far as physical, like if you have other physical ailments within the body, as far as stomach issues, muscle issues? I'm just trying to get an idea of what other capabilities does ayahuasca have just besides the mental part?
So I don't want to sound like a snake oil salesman, because I don't know the method of action or how this can happen, but I have been present when people have worked with ayahuasca and it has cured their Lyme disease. I have been present and was told when someone came and went back from our center and then went back home, that they were cured of cancer. I have seen people who have told me that they are no longer diabetic when they were born with diabetes. I have seen all types of muscle and back issues that veterans have come in, and they talk about how there's less or none where they've had before. And again, this sounds like ayahuasca is the cause of this. It may be a huge part of it, but also the healing from the healers comes a huge part of this. The shamans or the Shipibo or whatever type of healer you're working with, they have the knowledge. A lot of times they have a huge part in that, which is why we try to communicate with these healers and let them know what the intentions of each of these guests are. And a lot of times that can be rectified or helped within that aspect.
Thank you for answering that, because I did hear the same thing, as far as that if people have went to do ayahuasca to try to, rather than do chemo, they went this route, and it was part of healing for them as well. So thank you for answering.
It really depends on what you believe is the psychosomatic connection, meaning like how strong do you think the mind controls the body? Some people would say that the mind controls the body 100%. I think that that actually would fall into the realm of how the Shipibo sort of see it. Physical ailments or manifestations of an internal trauma that can be healed would be, I think, the answer from that perspective. Jared, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's sort of how I understand the Shipibo tradition.
That's exactly like the Shipibo tradition. Yeah.
But that being said, your question really touches on a bigger question too, which is like what happens in your body. And that's an important part, I think, of the preparation and integration, at least for veterans of war. And I think that, Jared, you guys provide that in the same way, which is to say that ayahuasca has an anti-inflammatory property across the entire central nervous system. Ayahuasca has been shown, at least suggested to be shown, to stimulate neurogenesis, or the growth of new neurons inside of your brain. It helps to regulate in the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. These are the places in your brain that are responsible both for your fight or flight response, as well as your memory retrieval, your reaction to those memories specifically. And it has an anti-amnesia factors. Like sometimes we'll have some trauma in our bodies or in our brains, or typically both, which when we recall it, we can't help but recall it without feeling that trauma. So the body is really, really good at creating elegant solutions to really complex problems. So one of the things that typically happens is people will actually like completely submerge a memory. You'll forget it completely, and it'll be out of your conscious memory. So ayahuasca has the ability to retrieve some of those, and really what I think it's trying to do is change your default mode network. And what that really is the way that you've programmed your body and brain to respond to any sort of interaction that may occur. So you can think of it as like you have a really healthy and amazing way to respond to anything that happens in your life, whether it's like a red light or whether it's somebody attacking you or any of the millions of other things in between. You make a trillion decisions every day that most of them are on autopilot. That autopilot is your default mode network. It's the way that you have shown through experience to effectively traverse each of these experiences that happens. So what ayahuasca can do is basically, and I'm quoting the Beckley Foundation a bit here, is put new powder down over your default mode network so that you can start carving new paths or new ways to respond to these stimulus. So each of these stimuli, rather than taking whatever, let's say when somebody raises their voice at you, your first inclination is to raise your voice back. That's what you've learned is a way to protect yourself and to assert your boundaries in that position when that happens. So what happens after ayahuasca, instead of defaulting to I'm going to get angry when someone's angry at me, what you might find instead is that you have another moment to process where you see the anger come at you, you look at it and recognize and say that's anger, and then you feel your response starting to form, like I need to be angry back. But instead you have a logical moment where you say, is this the correct response? Is this how I want to respond? And so the integration work on the back end is reinforcing these new default modes, for lack of a better term, these new responses to ensure that the things that we've learned over this incredibly challenging medicine phase, that they become the default moving forward. So I hope that answered it, but yeah, that's what I was thinking when you were saying that.
Two things. One is I'm curious to learn anything about microdosing similar to psilocybin, if there's a way or a possibility or an experience of microdosing mildly with ayahuasca instead of the heroic dosages typically, and what might be the benefits or cautions. But I also wanted to compare some notes with your experience. The first ayahuasca experience, I've done about almost 20 ayahuasca experiences, and what I found was having a lifetime of trauma, a lifetime of experiences, and then in the Marine Corps having some violent experiences. And what I found for me was I was very surprised to come across myself huddled on the ground, suffering, with all these beings observing my suffering, including myself. So I was observing my suffering. And what I found was not just the absence of conflict and fear and the absence of hypervigilance, but not even the possibility of conflict. Like it transcended every molecule of my body, went to a place of total serenity. And I was able to tether myself into that serenity and bring it back into my conscious waking hours. And every single time I've done Kana, or every time I've done psilocybin or MDMA since that experience, I've been able to go back to that place. Has anybody else had that similar experience? Because everybody talks about tripping off and having wild rides and stuff, and I had a lot of that. But ultimately, when I went through the acceleration into the stratosphere and I arrived above the clouds, that was a place that I had not expected. Anybody else have that kind of experience, and maybe commenting on microdosing?
I've had quite a few of those experiences, to be honest. Up past the clouds into oneness is the best way I could put it. No more me, no more you, just it. And that it was, the best way to describe it would be love and understanding and compassion and playfulness. You know, like all the good stuff that we really talk about or love to experience on this. But I don't think that that is necessarily the goal when it comes to psychedelics. It's a happy experience when it comes, and it can be transcendent for those. But for me to get there, a lot of times, like yourself, I had to go through some really rough stuff that I had conditioned about myself before I even could get there. Like I had to clean up a lot of who I thought I was in order to relax enough to be even to taste that aspect of reality. And so I think that a lot of people may get caught up in searching for that. That's what I want. I want to go to that one place with psychedelics, but that's just one of the many places to go. And to answer your question on microdosing, I find microdosing psilocybin to be profoundly effective on many people who have tried it, especially if you are afraid of working with psychedelics. This is a wonderful way for you to get a start into, like, a toe in the water, because you may start to feel some of the major benefits that we're talking about from a macro dose on a slower process building up with a smaller dose. Because as Wiley said, and as we hopefully most of us know, psychedelics create neuroplasticity in the brain, which helps us learn and create new habits. So when you're taking a small sub-perpetual dose of psychedelics that is still stimulating the brain and reducing blood flow to the amygdala, or the default mode network, which is helping you to help the brain to communicate with itself in new ways. So you might think of new problems in different ways, how to solve them. And ultimately, most people have said it's a mood elevator. So people don't want to be on their their pharmaceuticals anymore, because they're finding that this is safer and it gives them the mood elevation and the focus that they're looking for. But I'm also not saying that people should go out there and do this without doing their own research and making sure that what they are doing is right for them, and where they are getting their medicine is actually the right place to do that. And so this is one of the issues without regulation, and there's just nothing but an underground that we're all kind of just walking through the dark with a lot of trust. So anybody who's thinking about it, please do your research and make sure you're doing it safely.
Yeah.
Very close to Ram Dass there. I thought you were going to go all the way in with Ram Dass. We're all just walking each other home.
I love
Cool.
Ram Dass.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back when we were talking about the benefits and healing potentials of ayahuasca specifically, or entheogens just in general. Yeah, I've had experiences as well where people have had healing, which there's not a clear mechanism for that healing to have happened. Like for us in the work, and by the way, Bruno, Wiley Gray is the founder of Veterans of War, which helps veterans find healing through ayahuasca. Us being in the work, how do we present to someone who comes with a physical ailment or something serious like cancer or something to even talk about the healing potential? Because there's some fine line between ayahuasca can heal anything and wanting to kind of stay in our lane and not.
Again, it's an individual perspective. The first thing I would ask a person that's coming to me asking for healing is, what have you tried? What has not been working? Have you gone the holistic route? What have you done with holistic route? What have you not done with holistic route? All that kind of stuff, kind of get a gauge for where they're at. And then when they're ready, I'll give them the research and the information that I have about ayahuasca from my personal experiences. And then that would be on them to move forward to decide if it's their healing, because I'm not trying to sell ayahuasca to anybody ever. I'm not trying to sell psychedelics to anybody ever. And the only way that I think that psychedelics are sold through me are just by my actions, because I have a whole story in my life about psychedelics, but people see my actions and my words and they say, oh, well, what's this going on? Or why is he acting that way? And for me, my method for getting to this place in my life was psychedelics.
I would just add that, programming at Veterans of War is not meant to be a replacement for physical or mental health care. It's meant to work in tandem with an already existing protocol. I would never, ever tell somebody that it was a good idea to stop taking cancer medication because they think they're going to get miraculous healing from ayahuasca. In fact, I think that's, for me, patently crazy. I know it's a bit of a fine line to be in the West talking about such mystical things, just as Jared has said earlier. There's a really a spiritual and mystical component to working with this medicine long term. If you haven't had the experience, all I can say is trust me and trust Jared. You do it long enough and you start to see the connections and the interconnectivity that we all share, and it's hard to deny it. Once the veil's been lifted from your eyes, you can't really go back. It's kind of like that Matrix moment, like the red pill, blue pill, right? Well, once you take the pill, you can't go back. So do I believe that there's absolutely amazing stories of profound healing in this work? Absolutely. I've seen and heard them. Do I sell that to anyone at all? No. Not at all. That is the exception, not the rule. And moreover, I think it's really important to have a balance between Western medicine and this plant medicine. I think it's an interesting place to talk, because honestly, there's a real convergence right now between, how do we incorporate these ancient plant medicines into the Western medicine model? And just as I just said all those things, I also don't think that some of these things should be taken out of the jungle necessarily. Like ayahuasca, absolutely does have a home in the West, but should it be in a clinic with white walls and bright halogen lights and completely sterilized? Absolutely not. I don't believe that for even a second. It's something that exists on a greater plane than just what we see. But in a nutshell, it's supposed to be working in tandem with your healthcare needs, not a replacement for it.
Thank you. Same with us. I would never, ever tell someone that they should drink ayahuasca for their health. If I only wait for someone to tell me, hey, Jared, I want to drink ayahuasca. And I go, okay, I can help you. Because I assume at that point that they have done the work to get to that point. And if, like Wiley said, if someone was on some life-saving medications and that was going to be contraindicated for ayahuasca, like it could be risky, I would point them in different directions, because ayahuasca, and really I've said this a few times in this call, is they're not magic pills. These are not things that are going to heal you completely. You're not going to get rid of your neurosis. They're not going to get rid of the negative self-talk, but it will give you some space. It will give you some footholds. It will give you some tools, but it's not going to do the work for you. I think I did see another question here about what do we do for antidepressants. So I'll quickly answer that. So we do a vetting process, and in that process, we ask for a thorough what's on their medication list. And for veterans, a lot of times the medication list can be pretty robust. So if they are not in a position at this time to safely wean off, we do not suggest them to wean off their medication. We do not give them any medical anything. We tell them that these things may be contraindicated and it would be better for them to wean off, but they need to speak with their doctor about the proper method of weaning off, because some of these you feel like you can cold turkey them, but then as soon as you cold turkey them, you're having suicide ideation, your symptoms are all over the place. Like it's not the best option to just cold turkey your medication that you've been on for the last 6 months to a year. So as a coach, and when I do vetting calls, I make sure that when I do see some of these medications that are red flags for ayahuasca, we just communicate with them, let them know that this does not disqualify them forever. It just means that this is the medication that is contraindicated. And if they'd like to work with ayahuasca, they need to speak with their doctor and take the proper steps forward. How would you contact someone in Heroic Hearts to help? Great question. So it's really simple. You can just go on our website, which is www.heroicheartsproject.org, and there will be a contact us link there. And then you can contact us directly from that website. Also, if you are interested and want to donate $20, $1,000, $1 million, please go to our website and donate. And the same goes for Veterans of War. You can subscribe to their stuff and see what they have available and donate on their website as well.
PPS too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all of that.
PPS as well. All the nonprofits, please give generously.
David just put something here. What about physical treatment for depression like TMS? Does that prevent treatment opportunities?
I'm not sure I understand what TMS is, and Wiley's giving me a thumbs down. It's not contraindicated, so I would take that.
I don't think.
Temporal mandibular syndrome. It's when your jaw gets out of joint and it's extremely painful.
Yeah, that would not be contraindicated for the work, and in fact, that might be something you could bring to a healer.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It actually would be one of the things that, when it comes to the anti-inflammatory nature of, for example, ayahuasca, it might be something that allows you to actually unclench your jaw. It might be something long-term that would be beneficial. But when you talk about contraindications for ayahuasca specifically, there are only a few. And like having a heart condition, being on SSRIs, having a dissociative personality disorder, these can all be very difficult to work with. But even the dissociative disorder, those can usually be worked with. But the heart, if you have a history of heart complications, ayahuasca raises your heart rate. So again, the whole purpose of this is to get you in access with medicine. And if you're contraindicated, you're not going to get medicine, you're going to get poison. And none of us are in the business of providing poison access points. So hopefully that answers it.
I was completely wrong about TMS in terms of it. Yeah. TMS is a temporal
transcranial,
but
magnetic stimulation. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you, John. Thank you for that. Yeah, so TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. They put a device on your head and it sends micro stimulations throughout the brain. So it's not a substance that you take or anything. I know some guys that do TMS and also partake in psychedelic sessions. I would talk with your doctor about doing these because they'll have a better understanding of the medical aspect of it. So that's what I would say.
And if anybody's really curious, you really can look up contraindication ayahuasca on Google, and there'll be about 100 websites with all of their lists of things. What I usually use as a rule of thumb is that if it won't work with an MAOI, you shouldn't be on it. And that's really the key aspect with ayahuasca, is that if there's a contraindication with the MAOI, which we have lots of research on with what works with MAOIs and what doesn't, that will help you decide whether you're on something that is going to be contraindicated or not. And you can go from there.
Thank you very much for being here, and you guys have a great day.
Adios, everybody.
Thank you so much.